Hello, and welcome to another episode of the IT Wildcard. So I suppose this could be considered to be a follow-on episode from the last one, where I was talking about 5 things I enjoy in IT and 5 things I don't. And thank you very much to a friend of the channel that commented on that particular idea that then gave me the idea for this one. It was a particular what I call high utility comment, in as much as there was lots of stuff in there that was really great ideas for things to think about in future videos and just generally. So thanks very much for that. Also thanks to the person that reminded me about the term that I couldn't remember, which was the Dunning-Kruger effect. I'll include a link to that particular effect in terms of how it's described on Wikipedia. And I'll also include links to all of the programming languages that I'm going to talk about today. So yeah, this is a follow-on, and I've got my own twist here. So I thought, rather than do so many things so many languages I like, so many languages I dislike, or what it is about particular types of programming languages that I like or dislike, the twist is here. I'm going to go through, so I would suggest getting some sort of beverage and maybe a light snack to get you through this. But I'm going to go through chronologically and look at all of the programming languages I remember learning to some degree, no matter how small. You can see I've got experimented here as an option. Just got a very simple Excel spreadsheet. I spent a very enjoyable, not a day, but several hours putting this together. And once I put this together, I just was so keen to put the video out, I just decided not to do any other prep work at all. So I'm just going to chat about the entries here. I just used Excel to put this together, and I had to go through and look up some of my old course materials and coursework, and as a result of doing that, it's also generated ideas for some useful I'm trying to think of the name of the series that I do now on stuff. Anyway, so there's some episodes. It forced me to dig out some course materials, which now I have a big pile of books on my desk I use for shooting videos. So no doubt they'll feature in some future episode. Yeah. So we're going to start off around about 1978 here, and then I'm going to finish off this video talking about the sort of stuff I've been working on this week. One thing I don't know if it's good or bad actually, but I regret not being able to do because of copyright issues, is having some nice music playing in the background as well, but that might be distracting. I'll include also in the links a link to a walking playlist I just put together, which is this one I was listening to this morning actually. And this all, where this came from, will feature later in this video. So a bit of Pet Shop Boys, Erasure and Depeche Mode. So yeah, I'm going to talk to that list and how that came about later on. So for me, programming started with Commodore Basic. So in 1978, I started my computer studies course. That ran for 2 years. And when I first started doing the course, we were actually coding in Basic using coding sheets, these green coding sheets, and then they were being sent off to run on a mainframe. I'm assuming it was the accounting system for what in North America they call the school board, whatever was called at the time in the UK. But that was a thing to do back in the day. A lot of big accounting systems had times during the day when they weren't heavily utilised. And so through time sharing, they could provide a means by which, in this case, schools could run programs. So we'd send off our coding sheets, and then 2 weeks to a month later we'd get the results back. The bad thing was that if you made a mistake and it didn't run, it would then take another 2 weeks and so on. So it's quite time consuming. At some point, sometime around 79, the school that I was at acquired, initially one Commodore pet, and then that expanded up to 2 or 3 over the course of a few years. And so, I don't know if I spelled Commodore right there, I think I have. So I went from just, coding in generic BASIC, I suppose, into Commodore BASIC, which is fairly similar. And that was up until about 1980. I got a question mark. So what happened was, the course ended. I took my O-levels, CSEs in 1980. Didn't do quite as well. Did excellent in computer studies, funnily enough. And I then stayed on a year to do some other courses and also retake a couple of things that I needed to resit. In 81, that's when I started work. So what happened was I left school in around about May, June of 1981, and was really lucky to find employment pretty quickly after I left school, working in a lab, which I worked there for 12 years in lots of different capacities. And the other fortunate thing was that in the September I got sent to college, initially for 2 years and then another 2 years. 2 years at Crawley College doing chemistry, and then another 2 years in Brighton doing applied biochemical techniques. And during that time we were using computers to do various things. I think both courses that I were on, one was an ONC in chemistry, one was an HNC in applied biochemical techniques, had a computing unit. So, and it was basic, so it was good because it just kept me ticking over in terms of, I was doing some sort of programming. And the reason why there's a question mark here is that the year that I stayed on, I think I also got a chance, even though I wasn't doing computing, to dabble on the Commodore PET still. So between finishing up at school, staying on an extra year, and then using computers again at college whilst I was working, because I was going to college 1 day a week whilst working in these labs, I was using a computer. Sometime around, and I'm not sure the exact date, but sometime around, I suppose 87, 88 maybe, I started to program. We had some Apple IIs in the lab, and then eventually we acquired a couple of Amstrads 1640. I don't know if anybody is of an age that remembers those, but after the IBM PC was released, there were a lot of clones produced, and Amstrad was one company that produced clones of the IBM PC. And so although in the firm as a whole, the first computer I think that appeared that wasn't like a high-end research machine or a mini computer, because they had some DECs they used to use for the number crunching for computer taxonomy, computer identification, bacterial identification, bacterial taxonomy, numerical taxonomy. So they had some DECs kicking around. I'm trying to remember what the operating system was on those, whether it was CPM or not. So there were decks, there were some Dells as well, which were slightly more high end. And then we had these, like I say, early IBM in the production lab, and then in the quality control lab where I worked, we had these Amstrads. And so I went from doing a bit of Apple Basic on the Apple II to, over time, using different combinations. I mean, GW Basic and QBasic are pretty much identical. They were what came, the GW Basic was what came in DOS, on the IBM and also on the Amstrad. QuickBasic was the compiled version, I think, of Qbasic. It's one way or the other. I can remember which way. I never remember which way around it is. So, as I ended up doing a lot more work, writing code to do quality control processes, process improvement, document prep, and also bacterial identification on, DOS PCs, DOS-based PCs. I switched from them being just in the interpreted version of BASIC into the compiled version, so I could lock down the programs for general use in the firm. And there were some special projects I got involved with towards the end, and that was right the way through to 1993, when I ultimately left the firm. Now, also during that time period, as I changed job positions, I started to get involved with other things, like obviously working in DOS. I did a lot of scripting and batch files, and then there was a period from 89 through to about 91 where I had my own little department coming up with programming solutions for various things. It was basically my reward, that's how I think of it, for doing all of this stuff. So I did all of this sometime, like I'll say, a lot of it in terms of the process improvement, document prep, bacterial identification, would have been around 88 it started in earnest. And between 81 and 88 I was just dabbling around really on whatever computers we had kicking around to just keep my chops up in some form of programming. But 89 to 91 was when I was working as a project leader for a one-person department that was me, and so I got to dabble in other programming languages. And the three that I remember were Forth, SNOBOL, and machine code. But the reason why I ended up having to look at machine code, and I didn't really code in it as such, but I had to become familiar with hexadecimal a lot more, was I needed to learn quite a bit about viruses. I felt it was important to learn about viruses and malicious programs generally. I got some very interesting books from that time period, actually. I should do a future episode in those as well. And that really led into editing hex, so using hex editors. So I've never really coded in machine code. Where have I? No, I think I might have done one thing. I copied some code out of a book. But I certainly, what I learned informed me in terms of editing headers on files and stuff like that. That's what I suppose I'm trying to say. And that carried on, all through, in terms of the hex editing, into 2021, which is when I was last actually employed at a firm. Between about 94 to 95 I took some time to learn assembly language and C++. This was after I'd left the labs and I was working in an accounts office. I was working on a support line for EPOS, electronic point of sale. And I'd acquired my first PC. We had a Commodore C4 before that in the house, which I used to program in BASIC again. But I actually bought an Amstrad, a later model. I'm trying to remember what model it was. I think it had what? Was it 4 meg of RAM? Probably. Something pretty low. Anyway, so yeah, I remember I had a book on assembly language and using A86 to learn assembly language, worked through that, created a DOS utility for work, probably something that did, what calculations did we used to do back then? I think we were doing, what's called early termination. Sounds ominous, but that's where someone's got like a rental agreement and they're going to wrap up their rental and pay off the remainder. It's like I think it more was actually applied to like hire purchase, those sort of things. And similar thing with C, C++. I worked through the books. I started off learning C really, and then dabbled a little bit with C++, but mainly it was C. And wrote another DOS utility, again probably trying to just speed up something we used to do in a Excel spreadsheet. We had a lot of these Excel spreadsheets that were very poorly written and they didn't quite work as intended, and we ended up having to modify them, which I thought was ridiculous. And we were told we couldn't modify the template because it was from head office. So I just wrote a little piece of code that did it all and just started using it without asking permission. I didn't really care so much back then. I mean, I cared about my job, but I had a bit of a laissez-faire about, well, if they don't like it, then they can always get rid of me, sort of thing. And it seemed to work as a technique. That was quite successful. And then in 95, I got hold of, I think, Visual Basic 3 through work, and then decided just to learn how it was different from QuickBasic, Qbasic, and also learn how to program for Windows in a GUI. And so what I did as a project, I ported over some bacterial identification programs for stuff I'd done towards the end of 93. And in fact, when I think about it, although I learnt Visual Basic in around 95, it wasn't until about 98 that I finally got round to porting over those, and that was by the time I was working for myself. Prior to working for myself and between working in the accounts office, which would have been, well, basically end of 97 into 98, I went and did a programming job for 18 months working on account systems. But while I was still working at the accounts office doing EPOS support, I started an Open University course, a postgraduate diploma in technology. And there were a couple of courses there where they were programming in that. So there's a course in 1997 that I did on relational database systems, and as part of that I had to learn SQL. And then also I did one on object-oriented software technology, where I had to learn SmallTalk alongside other things. I had to learn like object-oriented development techniques as well. The SQL I did on and off from 97 through, I guess, the 2021, when I stopped working for a firm recently. And I used SQL on and off through that time period. SmallTalk, only really used it while I was learning it. I've never used it since. And then sometime in 97 I started dabbling in VBA, really as a result of stuff I needed to do in Access. There's some, if you do any sort of advanced database work in Access and you're going down the route of relational databases like multiple tables, it's very hard to escape not using some form of VBA code for various update reasons to tables and other things. At least at the time anyway it was. So once I learned VBA in 97, which really was just Visual Basic but for applications. That's what it is, Visual Basic for applications. So it wasn't, there wasn't much to learn really. Just again, I know I may have mentioned this before, might have been of part, in the previous video actually I was talking about things that I don't particularly enjoy, and it is often working with these systems where there's like event driven triggers which are buried inside like GUI interfaces, and trying to find them and trying to work out what particular trigger someone used when they've clicked on a button or whatever has happened. Can be a bit of a nightmare, again depending on how well the development environment is written and behaves, because some are easier than others to do. So on and off, dabbled in VBA. The two main places I've done it is Excel a lot actually, on and off. I always writing little programs to speed up Excel processes and data conversion and various other things. I put data conversion here. Also using it, I when I worked for myself from 98 through to 2009, I was teaching as well as doing IT troubleshooting, training, programming, web development, and I got involved in things like data conversions as well. And then subsequently, when I've taught, working as a support person at a firm, obviously there's a teaching element involved with that, and then showing other members of staff how to convert data as well. And so, although I haven't necessarily taught them VBA, I have had to show and teach VBA at other firms. Again, mainly I think in that instance, Access actually. So jumping, because I'm sort of jumping around a little bit here. So 97 to 98, the period I was working as a programmer, this is a value-added reseller. We used to do modifications for accounting systems. A system called Concorde XAL. We were actually a startup from another small company. So initially it was just me and this other guy who was my boss. And we were a subsidiary, I suppose, of another firm that did acts as value-added reseller. So value-added reseller is basically, in software terms, or at least the way the domain we worked in, you sold the accounting system at cost, and then you made your money through the modifications to the accounting system. And the underlying programming in here was a 4GL. So Concorde XAL was the system. I think Concorde XAL was actually the programming language as well. I think Concorde, I can't remember if the Concorde was the name of the accounting system or it was called Concorde XAL, but within it you could program it using this fourth generation language. So it's all this, like, again, database back end, a lot of event triggers, a lot of forms. There was both a DOS version and a GUI version. So I spent 18 months learning how to use it and coding in it. At some point I did create a DLL, and I'm not sure if I used C++ or dabbled in Visual C++ at that point. I had a full version of an earlier version of Visual C, like Visual C version 1, which came with as a Microsoft training book. And I do remember creating a DLL for a demo. I needed to create like an animated button that also made the noise of a phone ringing. I won't go into why, but there was a reason. We were demoing it to a company that wanted to use the accounting software in a call center environment, and I was just emulating something. Also, I had to learn MS-SQL, so the Microsoft incarnation of SQL, around about the same time. We did a course on that, but using MS-SQL, you know, I've used it on and off since then, for various reasons, on courses. When I did a data science course, which I'll come on to in a moment. And so right up, I've not used MS-SQL, I don't think, in the last 2 years. I do have a family member that's going to college, and so I don't know if they've asked me any SQL questions yet. They've asked me some PHP stuff, I think, which we'll get onto in a moment. So sometime in 2003, I started to learn HTML. So I went self-employed from 1999 to 2009, when I came to Canada. And the reason why there's a question mark here is possibly I did actually teach myself HTML before then, because that's actually quite a long time. I can't imagine myself not dabbling in HTML while I was working for myself. So yeah, sometime between 98, 99 and 2003, I was definitely dabbling with HTML. 2003 was when I sort of formally learnt it as part of this course. Really good course. I don't know if they still run it. It's called a Certificate in Web Applications Development. It is an undergraduate course, but it's very hard. In fact, all of the courses are what are called level 3, which is like honours level, and also postgraduate level. So it's strange, but there's 6 courses, and they advise actually I only took one at a time. So it took me, I think you could do 3 a year. I was either 2 a year or 3 a year, maybe 2 a year, because it took me about 3 years to do, I think, in the end. So I think it was 2 a year. Had some gaps in between as well. There were 12-week courses, but they weren't offered every quarter. I think they were offered every. There's something strange about the offering. There was an unusual gap between the courses, from what I remember. When I did my postgraduate, these ran back to back, literally. The moment you finished up one exam, you'd already received your course materials for the next, and they ran every 6 months. And you could stack them up however you wanted to. I did, I think, a maximum of 2 1 year. But with these, I did them literally one at a time. So taking the longest time you could. And there were 6. I don't think I've got them all now. I haven't got them all listed here. 382 was one on servers. So it was more on server theory. We did do a bit of Apache as well. So yeah, HTML for the Web Basics course, JavaScript for the client side of applications course, and I was pretty much doing that, all through while I was working for myself. ASP, Active Server Pages, VB Script, so that's what's used within Active Server Pages. For the server side of application development course, I didn't use that outside of learning it in 2004. ColdFusion, so the ColdFusion markup language, in combination with MySQL as the database backend. Learned that in 2004. MySQL I did carry on with on and off because I was sort of swapping between MS-SQL systems and MySQL systems for various reasons, either teaching, because I was teaching at college whilst I was working for myself as well, or just helping solve problems that clients had. And you could say, I suppose, I'm trying to think whether in the 2010s I ever used MySQL. I think it was more MSQL I went back to doing. So yeah, and then when we got to do the open source development tools course, I had to learn PHP, and we were using MySQL as the back end there. The PHP book actually had MySQL in it as well, which was quite handy. And that sort of again spilt over. I did a little bit of PHP whilst I was working for myself, but it wasn't my favourite thing to program in. Then at some point, and I can't remember the exact date, I dabbled in Perl, but I don't remember the context. I got a book on it in the context of CGI. So I'm assuming it was something to do with either web servers or forums, because that's the only thing I can remember doing, where I was setting up servers and forums on web space just to teach myself how to do it, in case it ever got to a situation where I had to advise a client. A lot of the reason why I did all of this wasn't so much to do web development, which I did do the odd bit of web development. It was more to be able to understand how the technology worked, to be able to advise clients. That was the reason for really doing it. So I didn't really have aspirations as a web developer. It was more to be able to troubleshoot systems where they were a feature. Or if my client was having problems with a provider, I could sort of advocate on their behalf. That a lot of what I've done over the years, I'll stop bashing the microphone. A lot of what I've done over the years has been because I've had to act as an advocate rather than necessarily, code in a language. And of course, in order to be an advocate for something, invariably you have to learn it to a fairly high level. So yeah, so it's inevitable. Out of the blue, and again, this is sometime 2009, 2010, when I first came to Canada and had a bit of downtime, I decided to teach myself Java, which wasn't too tricky, having dabbled with C, C++, and just did it to write an interface to the Last.fm API, of which you've seen me use a variant, which I then recoded in Python. And funnily enough, there's Python. So I learnt Python around 2016 as part of an edX course. That's my current go-to language. That's pretty much what I code in now if I want to just do something quick and dirty for some API solution. And most of it's just for my own enjoyment, actually. I've never had to code Python for a client. Coding Python for a client. Same time I was doing those courses, there were a mixture of them, and they were all machine learning, data science courses, and some Excel stuff as well mixed in there. I had to learn Transact-SQL, so really it was just again variants of what I'd done already earlier on. So no real surprises there, but I'd never actually done any Transact-SQL since then, since 2016. Decided to learn PowerShell in 2017 because obviously DOS scripting is, you still do it and it's fun to do, but I had to learn a lot of stuff to do with tweaking server things, and just there's a few interesting things you need to learn in PowerShell if you've got client machines that are locked down for security reasons. Sometimes you have to learn PowerShell to install certain programming languages as well. So I found that was really useful. And so it comes up now and again. I mean, most of the time with PowerShell, I end up just copy and pasting a lot of stuff. And then really, 21 and 2022 has been spent just experimenting with different things. So Clojure, F#, R, Rust. I did a little series on Rust. Are all just experiment. I learned purely to experiment. So these are all learning from books. These two, actually, this one I can't remember what I learned from. Clojure, I've got the O'Reilly book on Clojure. F#, I must have learned off of some free ebook off the website, I think. R, I had one of those in Easy Steps book that I learned from. And then Rust, if anybody that's watched the series will know I used the book, which is available online, but I've actually got the paper copy of the Rust programming language, I think it's called. So yeah, that's the history of my sort of my involvement with programming. And then really the follow on to that, what things have I enjoyed working at most, programming language most, what haven't I? Well, I think what I've tended to find, and I don't know if anybody finds the same thing, is really if I don't find any utility in it, I just don't use it. So just going backwards, these to some degree were just learnt for fun. This, however, I would love to learn properly. You probably got the impression if you watch the videos that I have done, I really loved working in the Rust environment. It was fantastic. And so I probably would like to revisit this at some point. These other ones here, there's no real reason for me to learn them. I mean, sure, R is useful for data science, but hey, why use R when you've got Python? So Python is my go-to. Some of the other ones I'll probably only ever pick up again if I get questions about them come up from family members, as both of them work in some capacity or involved in tech. So I do get the odd IT technical question and a programming question now and again. Anything else here that I would probably revisit? I mean, what I fancy doing actually is I do have, I'll show you in a moment, I do have the code for this, the port that I did. I wouldn't mind porting it into Python, or actually simplifying the code and then using it as a project to learn different languages would be a fun thing to do, actually, I think. So yeah, on reflection, I wouldn't mind revisiting some code that I've done, say here, and then recasting it into other languages. So that will be an excuse to revisit some of this. But yes, I suppose really the simple answer is this is what I use now pretty much all the time. I did explore these two, or read about them recently, because they were in that. There's a book I bought which I mentioned in an episode about like at the time when I was going through stuff I have, and I was talking about coding books. I think I spoke about a book on obscure code, on more sort of esoteric code, and one of the chapters, although these aren't necessarily esoteric programming languages, spoke about more obscure languages. And I do actually have a book on SNOBOL, and long-term viewers of the channel will probably know that I think for most of the ones here I have some sort of major textbook to go with it. Certainly I have the standard ones for this, and I've still got a book on assembly language, and still got a book on DOS and all of this stuff. I've still got all my Open University College books. I've got a book on Java somewhere lurking around. And that's another thing I need to go through and do a video on my tech library. So hopefully that was enlightening in terms of just generally the sort of languages I've learned. And like I said, really at the end of the day, it's all about which ones have provided utility over the year. And that's how I tend to work. I don't really necessarily develop a dislike or a like for a language. It's purely utility based, where it's like, okay, well, I find this really, has a high utility to it, so I use it. I mean, you could say, I like using it because of that, but primarily it's all about utility. And so that's what tends to guide me. And then I do tend to, keep looking at new languages and then just dabble. So I noticed there were some ones that bubbled to the top of the list in the recent surveys that they've done. Stack Overflow one. And there's some stuff on there I still need to sort of tick off my bucket list, I suppose, as well. Ones that have been kicking around for a while. So, as I always do at the end of the episode, let's just talk a little bit about stuff I've been working on this week. So, a couple of things in Bing. One is, I was curious. I stumbled across, I don't think it does it on the web version, on the iPad version of Bing. It has a question in there at the top that says, how does Bing use AI? So the other day I got round to actually asking the question in the browser, in the Windows version. And then I just went down a particular rabbit hole, because I'd noticed when I tried it on the iPad, it was starting to give away things about its architecture. So I just went down a bit of an architecture rabbit hole. And so what I did is, once I did that, I then simply, as you can now do in these versions, came over here and went export. So I've downloaded that for later reading. The other thing, I've been playing around with some scripts, surprise, surprise, to do with music. And one thing I need to do, I think, is revisit some of my earlier Bing Adventures in Bing videos, because when I do these later ones, I can never remember what I've spoken about and what I haven't. There's a few episodes I recorded and then didn't decide to publish because things just didn't really, string together really well. And one episode I do think I've spoken about is where I sort of broke down a prompt into different sections. So I came up with another sort of multi-part one on music discovery. And it's based around this scenario. So this is back in the 80s. I used to go out for an evening walk on Ashdown Forest over a number of years. And it was a 90-minute walk, and I'd play 3 albums back to back. This was before the era of auto-reverse on Walkmans, or, Walkman-like devices. And so, seeing as I was taking the cassette out anyway, I used to just take other cassettes with me. Later, when I went on to auto-reverse, I just used to listen to the same cassette all the way around. And back at that time, it would have been 85, there were these 3 albums I used to listen to back to back while I was walking. Sister Mercy, The First and Last and Always, Bon Jovi's 7800 Fahrenheit, The Alarm Declaration, bit of an odd combination there. All came out around 84, 85. And so I sort of gave it that, soft suggestion, a bit of a background information to just pad out its mind space, if you like. And then I asked it the actual question. So this is the preamble really. So we've got the preamble here, along with a slightly waffly piece of background information, contextual information that's a little bit vague and may or may not add to the overall result. And then the actual question itself, which is I want you to think about this combination of albums by musically quite different bands, and then using another album I give you as a starting point, suggest 2 other albums by different artist bands from my suggestion that go together in a similar way to my original list of 3 album does. Yeah. Can you explain your choices? Here's the first album, New Order, Low Life. And then it goes through and starts to do it. So what was interesting is that even though I said here I'm not saying produce a table, interestingly enough. So I'm not saying produce a table. And it didn't do that, although some of it was sort of buried in text, some of it was bullet pointed. So once I'd asked this, and I use the term sticky I think to describe this, I felt that it was sticky enough that it understood the concept that any time I'd now ask it for another album, to give it another album, it would do the same. So I did it for Pulp, His and Hers, I did it for Metallica, Master of Puppets, Skids, The Absolute Game, New Model Army, No Rest for the Wicked, Killing Joke, Nighttime, and so on. This one went a bit weird, actually. Not sure why it did that. Yeah. So a little bit of variability there. Bit of a giveaway here. I've got a future episode coming up on Scorpions Tokyo Tapes for the albums that shaped me. So I was pre-prepping for that in terms of the little bit I do at the end. But yeah, I thought it was a pretty interesting question to try out. And then the final thing, I've been revisiting legacy files, which I think I mentioned. So there's the bacterial identification one. These are actually, they say they're access tables, they're not. They just n.mat. It's a format that I used for the raw data files. So you can see, if you know these file extensions, this is all Visual Basic stuff. And I don't have a version of Visual Basic that will work and compile this program to my my Windows 11, but I can go into this and there's enough information contained within here that a lot of this stuff is stored in like raw text format, and so I can see the original code. So I might get around to coding that in another language, but that's far off. It's not something I'll start doing tomorrow or even next week. And then I've also been looking at some of my old college lectures I used to do. So there's my computer and management studies courses and the diploma in management studies as well. So I was just revisiting that in terms of getting ideas for course materials. So I had a specific way I used to lay out my handouts I used to give the students. So what was that? That was the... I'm just trying to find somewhere in here should be how many pages is that? This looks like this was a I remember this, yeah, that this is funny. That was a preliminary sketch, so I should have the full one here, maybe. Yeah, that's more like it. Maybe I don't have a... Oh, that's right, yeah. now it's coming back to me. So this was more notes, and then there was another set of okay, so there's my PowerPoint stuff. Okay, that's how I did the course. It's funny when you go back, I can't quite remember the structure of the course. So that was like a Word summary document combined with PowerPoint files that the students got, and then the original DMS course I used to teach on, which wasn't project management. Originally the course had a management information systems unit in it, and if that changed, they dropped the management information systems and then it switched to project management. So that's why there was a change. So this was the original lecture note. So this would have been based on I decided to choose a course book. I'm trying to remember what it was. Somewhere in here. These are all the references. It was called Management Information Systems. Was it that one? It's so funny. It's such a long time since I've looked at this. I've not looked at these since, I don't know. Well, yeah, probably 2009. Yeah, 2009. I do have the book on my shelf somewhere. You can see some of these are quite old. Oh, there it is, Lucy. Yeah, 97. That's the one. Management Information Systems. The reason why is because you can see this is showing a bit weird, because in the UK you use A4 paper. In Canada it's letter, so it's just gone with the standard format that I currently use. So I'd have to reformat this to letter to get it, or reformat to letter to get it to look right. My word. This is, some of the stuff in here is fun. It's so old, like the sort of stuff it's talking about. You can see some of this stuff's gone a bit wrong. Again, you have to bear in mind who this was aimed at. So this was aimed at strategic managers. So we weren't getting knee deep in the technology. It was more, if I go to the top, it was more like an information sciences type thing. So looking at, like the system in its totality in a firm. So the management information system within a firm as a whole, as a wider system, as a soft system, not as a, I've been involved with developing like software-based management information systems. This is using the term MIS in the widest possible framework across all the different interfaces. And the focus of the course was on what rather than how. That was the way I sort of presented it. And we had a few people that were disappointed that were really good on the computer side of things, on what I call hard computing, and they had a bit of a struggle on this. But I'd been inspired to go down this route because I did a course on implementing new technologies, which was run as a social sciences based course, and I find it so useful to think of technology in that way that's why I went in that direction. The CMS one, this is a long video. That also changed halfway through because the specs changed. So when I started it, if I can find short version of this is. Yeah, the awarding body rewrote the spec a couple of years after I started teaching it, and it wasn't a problem for me. Looks like course notes. Oh yeah, there again, there's the Microsoft PowerPoint stuff. But at some point they changed it, and they changed it really close to the start of the course actually, and I'd already rewritten the course notes anyway, because I like to sort of mix things up a bit, and then I had to rewrite them again for the new outcomes, and I was the only one that did that. The other lecturers on the course tried to sort of retrofit their existing course into the new outcomes, and it came to a head at the end of the course when the sort of course, I can't remember what you call them, but the course gets assessed at the end, and the adjudicators, whatever you want to call them, the auditors come in to check it against the course spec, and yeah, I think in a couple of cases they had to redo some assessments. You can see what I did here is I actually mapped everything back to the course assessment criteria, so I was sorted. So I didn't have any problems there. Yeah, but I remember having to completely this has got everything in it. We had to do this one did actually feature doing, like, using certain programming languages and doing database and stuff like that, so it was a bit more granular, and of course again it was aimed at, it was supervisor level. Generally the CMS course is aimed at operational supervisor level, that sort of level, and then the DMS, the diploma, is aimed at strategic management level. So yeah, that's brought back some memories. But anyway, so I'm also currently just going back through this, because I'm definitely thinking about writing some courses again, just to get my chops back, so to speak. And it would be, I don't know if fun's the right word, but there might be some utility in me doing it for a programming language maybe, but at a really sort of high level, because there's plenty of good books that deal with the granular stuff. So there we have it. Sorry that's probably been very overlong, but there was a lot of things I just wanted to chat about and waffle on about that I thought were interesting. If there's any particular programming languages you would like me to talk a little bit more in depth about, and I can go into a bit more detail about what aspects of a language I find appealing or not on that list that I brought up, and I'll include links to all of those languages, to Wikipedia articles or relevant articles on them in the description. But yeah, if there's anything like that you want me to go into a bit more detail on, I'll quite happily do that in a future episode. So thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future episode.